Did you see us in there anywhere? This past year, we adopted revisions to our bylaws. It had been a long time, maybe 15 years. Needless to say, a lot can happen in that amount of time. We updated the language in general, so it is more gender inclusive, replacing the all-male he phrases with he and or she. This is a step in the right direction. Not quite all the way there. It's still reflective of a gender binary that is not realistic, but we could work on that. We added our mission statement, which is new since the initial iteration. We updated the language around membership and added a clause that allows the board to enter into contracts with ministers as opposed to a solely search and call process. This was a good thing, because they had done so already twice with me, and now they are officially authorized to do so. We are grateful to Sue Bauer and Robin Hubbard, who carried the bulk of this work forward, receiving input along the way from committees and the board. It is tedious, and to have come up with something to put forward at our annual meeting in just a year's time is impressive. Thank you. The revised bylaws passed with little to no discussion and were unanimously received. This is interesting to me. It says any number of things about us. We have implicit trust in those who crafted the changes. Or we are conflict avoidant, and so we don't discuss things like this publicly. Maybe we aren't that interested in the governance of the church. And perhaps it is almost summer and we want to get on with our Cape Cod Day. It could be any of these things, or none of them, or something else entirely. But it does raise questions. My sermon title asks a question too. Article 2. What's that? A show of hands if you know what I'm referring to. Anyone on the Zoom? Oh, they've all dimmed their lights. Article 2 refers to the section of the Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws that contains their purpose, their values and covenant, the sources of our tradition, and a statement about inclusion. What does this have to do with us, you may ask? And my response is a lot. As a member congregation, we are bound to this larger umbrella of governance as much as we are to our own boots-on-the-ground version. In a tradition that espouses congregational polity, we choose how to govern ourselves in individual churches. But we are also in relationship to the larger whole, to all the various UU churches around about us, and all of us, ourselves and those others, are in covenantal relationship to the overarching association. We are a bottom-up as opposed to top-down in our structure, but we are all pledged to one another in this faith tradition. The clearest example of this is our principles and our sources, which are a big part of the Article 2 language. So a little history here, just a little. The first principles and purposes were created at the time of the merger between the Unitarians and the Universalists in 1961 and involved compromise and collaboration in their making, as I'm sure you can only imagine. The current principles and purposes were last revised in 1987. That's 35 years ago. We have a 15-year rule about reviews to ensure that nothing becomes accidentally creedal, something we are adamant that we are not. In 2017, there was a discussion about adding an 8th principle addressing racism. And the first principle was amended to address non-human life. The 5th principle was the subject of a report in 2009 which spoke to the ways we don't fully embody an inclusive democratic process. And I'll say more about that in a bit. There have been lots of suggestions along the way, but the Commission on Appraisal has deemed it important for there to be a review and changes as necessary to ensure that we are living into a Unitarian Universalism relevant to the present and leading us into the future, one that holds us in times of great need and ethical, moral, and spiritual crises. Some would say times like now. We call ourselves a living tradition, and that implies change and growth, like all of life. Our bylaws need to evolve with us. So every morning at General Assembly, that annual meeting of our larger association where people from all over the country gather to do the work of the church, the assembly that you all sent me to back in June, we heard a presentation from the Article 2 Study Commission. This body of folks from many walks of life and church life had been charged with conducting a review and is empowered to revise, replace, or restructure the current language in ways that will sustain us for the next 15 years, considering the implications of the existing language and the errors or inadequacies it contains. This work has been ongoing now for a few years, and congregations have engaged in study and made reports to the Commission over time. Now, as near as I can determine, and I haven't been around that long here, but as near as I can determine, we have not involved ourselves in that process. But the opportunity has existed all along. A quick look at the pertinent sections of the UUA website produces a plethora of information. So maybe we are less interested in all this, but I want to suggest that this is to our detriment. There are times to be a lone wolf and times not to be. The times we are living in call for collective action if we intend to influence the world with this amazing faith that we hold. So here's a sampling of what was proposed. 2 draft purpose statements were presented, and the first one says, quote, "The UU Association shall devote its resources to and exercise its organizational powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. Its primary purposes are to equip congregations for vital ministry, to support and train leaders, both lay and professional, to heal historic inequities, and to advance UU values in the world. We do all this consistent with our theological pluralism," end quote. Now, the second one they put forward was a little different. It says, "The UUA's purpose is to grow and resource faith communities that support people through their lives' journeys and transform the world by liberating ourselves through love. We make that love real through care and justice for ourselves, for our communities, and for the larger web of existence that we are all in. We are called upon to risk ourselves for love," end quote. So both approaches are about serving member congregations, and the first proposal doesn't differ much from the current, where the primary purpose is stated as serving congregations, equipping leadership, and organizing new congregations, and implementing its principles. We had time for discussion amongst ourselves with folks, known and not, who were seated near us, and this was the case on each morning. And there was a link for people to submit their thoughts each day also, so that the commission received feedback. That link was open beyond the GA timeframe so that congregations who had been actually working on this could also respond. The overall draft changes will be presented in the coming year and ultimately submitted for vote at General Assembly 2023. The bigger changes were in the principles section. So I want you to go ahead and open a hymnal in your pew. Everybody grab one. To the first few pages following the preface. And there they are, our principles and the sources we draw on. And Jaden will put them up on a slide for those of us at home. These principles, I see you all looking. These principles speak to our values. The Commission is proposing something more along the lines of value statements, followed by associated action statements. Through the process that they've been engaged in, they came up with 7 values that seem to be common among Unitarian Universalists. So pluralism or diversity, interdependence, equity, generosity, justice, evolution, and love. And they sent us off to discuss how we might complete this sentence. We value, fill in the blank with one of the 7. Therefore, we covenant to say what you do because of that particular value. The idea stresses the Commission's goal of less verbiage. We love our words, as you use, but our heady language is not always as inclusive as we think. So less verbiage and more verbs, actions that express what we are all about. I was seated near a young couple from Pennsylvania. Together we worked on one of these, bouncing language off of one another, thinking about implications and complexity. It was fun, honestly. They were intent on submitting what we came up with and bringing this back to their congregation for further work. These were engaged UUs. And it made me hopeful to see a young couple that way. As for the sources, the next 2 slides, Jaden, their general proposal was to get rid of the list, because lists always leave something out, and there will always be more to know and learn from. Instead, they proposed this, quote, "As Unitarian Universalists, we draw upon and are inspired by the full depth and breadth of sacred understandings as experienced by humanity. Grateful for the religious pluralism which enriches our faith, we are inspired to ever deepen and expand our wisdom." End quote. That's it. This is an expansion of the statement below the sources in your hymnal, and it's on the next slide too. And I have to say that this was met with lots of discussion, because it is a pretty drastic reduction in language, even if it is more inclusive in nature. One thing that was talked about was that as Unitarian Universalists, we have an understanding of ourselves as a faith for all, that all are welcome. But our congregations and communities sometimes treat inclusion like we are inviting someone else to our party. We often resist understanding welcoming to be an invitation to evolve together. We have talked about this before here, the difference between welcome and inclusion and radical hospitality. They asked us to think about a time when we felt like we belonged. What were the components of that? And all of this with a mind toward making our inclusion statement truly inclusive. So as you can see, there is a lot going on. All of this is important because our bylaws are representative of who we are as people, as a faith community and a faith tradition. They speak to what matters, to what sets us apart as a unique expression of being and moving through our world. Governance is sacred work. I have believed this for a long time now. Having come up in life through traditions that were extremely hierarchical to those somewhat less so, I very much value the opportunity that Unitarian Universalism gives me to be part of the bigger picture, to express my beliefs freely, and to effect change. Since becoming a UU, I have been sent off to General Assembly as a voting delegate while I was a congregant, and also while I was a person in a leadership role in a church, and as a minister. And I have done so reluctantly in most cases, because the congregations I am representing have not done any pre-work or given me a charge with regard to important votes about the face of our association. The folks on the Fifth Principal Task Force who submitted that 2009 report were right to some extent. General Assembly is costly, and for years, only those with means could attend. These folks became the delegates, and so it wasn't truly representative. We have come some way, especially with the advent of the pandemic and really upping our game when it comes to virtual participation, but it is still not perfect. There is more work to do for this to be an equitable and truly democratic process. Some of that is on the larger organization to make happen, but we also have a role. I want to be part of and a minister to congregations that are engaged in our future, and I know that I'm not alone in this. It is a part of the shared ministry we talk about. If we are not a part of the process, we have little room to complain. So today is an invitation to dive into the work at hand here at the UU Meeting House and in the UUA as a whole. We are part of something so valuable to our times. To take for granted what we have in this tradition, to become complacent, to choose to go it alone, is to throw away the opportunity to make a real difference, utilizing the values that we hold close. So I leave you with another question. What will we say about ourselves here on the Hill in Chatham as we consider our future and that of Unitarian Universalism? Our hope rests on the answers that you discern. So may it be, and amen.
We have come to the time when we ask for your contribution to help sustain and grow our meeting house. Whether you are in a beautiful building or with us online on Zoom, our ongoing fellowship and organization continues, and we appreciate your support. As we will pass the basket for our offering, please remember there is also a separate basket at the back of the meeting house where you can contribute to our monthly community outreach. This is a good time to get that contribution ready to be placed in the basket as you go. We also have a donate button on our website for several different types of offerings, and of course you could also mail a check to the meeting house. The address is on the screen. Whichever you choose and however it arrives, we are grateful for your generosity. And now let there be an offering to strengthen and sustain this space, this community of memory and of hope, for we are the keepers of the dream.
Our closing words today are from Kathleen McTeague, number 706 in our hymnal. May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us